The crystal chandeliers of the azure crown restaurant cast dancing shadows across the white tablecloths as Natasha Brooks balanced 3 plates along her aching arm. Her feet throbbed inside the mandatory black heels, and she could feel a blister forming on her left heel. 6 hours into her shift, with another 4 to go, she moved through the dining room with practiced grace that concealed her. Exhaustion, 20-6 years old, and drowning in medical debt from her younger brother's leukemia treatments. Natasha had become an expert at wearing masks. The serene smile she offered to wealthy patrons revealed nothing of the eviction notice folded in her purse or the fact that she had eaten nothing but ramen noodles for the past week. Table 12 was her most demanding section tonight. Julian Westbrook sat alone, his presence commanding attention despite his apparent disinterest in his surroundings. His tailored suit probably cost more than Natasha earned in 6 months. She had served him twice before over the past month, and each time he had been polite but distant, leaving generous tips that felt more like dismissive gestures than appreciation. "Your Dover sole, Mr. Westbrook," Natasha said softly. Placing the plate before him with steady hands despite her fatigue, Julian looked up from his phone, and for the first time in their interactions, his dark eyes truly focused on her. Natasha felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. He was handsome in that sharp, dangerous way that successful men often were, all hard angles and controlled power. His black hair was touched with premature silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished air despite being only in his mid-30s. "You look tired," he observed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her. Natasha's professional smile never wavered. "Long shift, sir, but nothing I cannot handle. Will there be anything else?" Julian studied her for a long moment. Natasha had the unsettling sensation of being evaluated, measured against some invisible standard. "Actually, yes. Sit down, I'm sorry, Mr. Westbrook. But I'm not allowed to sit with customers during my shift. Not asking as a customer." He pulled out his wallet and placed $500 bills on the table. "I'm paying for 5 minutes of your time. Sit." Natasha glanced around nervously. Her manager Gregory was nowhere in sight, and the dinner rush was beginning to slow. Against every instinct screaming that this was a terrible idea, she slid into the seat across from Julian Westbrook. "What's your name?" he asked. "Natasha Brooks." "Natasha," said it slowly, as if tasting the syllables. "I've noticed you working here over the past few weeks. You're different from the others. More intelligent. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself despite obvious exhaustion." Natasha's guard rose instantly. She had heard variations of this speech before from wealthy men who thought compliments were currency for something she would never sell. "Mr. Westbrook, if this is going where I think it's going, I should tell you right now that I'm not interested." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have no idea where this is going. But I appreciate the directness. Let me be equally direct. I need someone for an evening. Not for what you're thinking, though I can understand the assumption. I need someone intelligent, presentable, and capable of discretion for a business function. One night. $50,000. Natasha's breath caught in her throat. $50,000. That would cover 3 months of her brother's treatments. It would pay her rent for half a year. It would let her breathe for the first time in 18 months. What exactly would I have to do? She asked carefully. Attend a charity gala with me this Saturday. Play the role of my companion. Be charming, sophisticated, and most importantly, convince my business associates that I'm not the emotionally unavailable workaholic they believe me to be. 8 hours of your time. Nothing physical required, though I would expect you to play the part convincingly. Hand-holding, perhaps, a dance or two, appearing genuinely interested in my company. Why me? You could hire a professional escort or ask any number of women who would do it for free. Julian's jaw tightened. Because those women want something from me? A ring, a relationship, access to my wealth. You, Natasha Brooks, want nothing from me except money, which makes you the most honest option available. You'll play the role, take your payment, and disappear back into your life. Clean, simple, transactional. Natasha's mind raced. $50,000 for one night of pretending. No physical expectations stated, though she knew better than to trust any man completely. But the money would change everything. Her brother Timothy could continue his treatments. She could pay rent. She could eat something other than noodles. "I need guarantees," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "A contract stating exactly what's expected. Payment up front, half before the event and half after. And the absolute certainty that nothing physical is required or expected." Julian pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. "My lawyer will have a contract ready by tomorrow. You'll receive half the payment the moment you sign it. The remainder when the evening concludes successfully. Are we agreed?" Natasha knew she should think about this, discuss it with someone, consider all the ways it could go wrong. But Timothy's latest hospital bill was $32,000, and she had exactly $417 in her checking account. Sometimes desperation made the decision for you. "Agreed," she whispered. Julian extended his hand across the table. When Natasha took it, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the business arrangement and everything to do with the man himself. His hand was warm, his grip firm but not crushing, and for just a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes that looked almost like loneliness. "We're something elegant," he said, releasing her hand. "I'll send a stylist to your apartment Friday afternoon. Don't argue, it's part of the arrangement. I need you to look the part. How do you know where I live?" Natasha asked, alarm bells ringing. "I know everything about everyone I do business with. Your address, your brother's condition, your debt, even the eviction notice you received last week. I'm thorough, Natasha. It's how I've built an empire." Instead of being frightened, Natasha felt a strange sense of relief. At least he was honest about his invasiveness. At least she knew exactly what kind of man Julian Westbrook was, the kind who saw people as chess pieces, gathered information as power, who controlled every variable in his precisely ordered world. "Saturday at 8, Julian continued. "My driver will collect you at 7. Be ready." He stood, leaving the $500 on the table along with a business card. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow morning. Read the contract carefully. If you have concerns, address them before signing. I value clarity in all my arrangements." As Julian walked away, Natasha stared at the money on the table and the business card embossed with simple black letters, Julian Westbrook, CEO Westbrook Global Properties. She had just agreed to spend an evening with one of the most powerful men in Manhattan, a man who casually spoke of $50,000, the way normal people discussed lunch money. She picked up the bills with trembling fingers. $500 for 5 minutes of conversation, $50,000 for 8 hours of pretense. What would Julian Westbrook consider a fortune? What would he pay for something he truly wanted? Natasha tucked the money and business card into her apron pocket and returned to work, her mind spinning with possibilities and dangers. She didn't know it yet. That conversation had set in motion a series of events that would unravel both their carefully constructed lives, revealing truths neither was prepared to face, because Julian Westbrook had made one critical error in his thorough investigation of Natasha Brooks. He had discovered her debts, her desperation, her brother's illness, but he had failed to uncover her most carefully guarded secret. The truth hidden beneath her waitress uniform and exhausted smile. Natasha Brooks was not who she appeared to be. And when Julian finally discovered the truth, everything he thought he knew about control, power, and the human heart would shatter like the crystal chandeliers above their heads. The game had begun. Though neither player yet understood the rules or the stakes, Saturday night would change everything. The question was whether either of them would survive the revelation intact. The contract arrived at 9 o'clock Friday morning, delivered by a courier in a black sedan who waited while Natasha read through 12 pages of legal terminology. Her hands shook slightly as she scanned the clauses, each one more specific than the last. Attendance, duration, 8 hours. Physical contact, limited to hand-holding, arm-linking, and one dance. Conversation topics. Pre-approved list of acceptable subjects. Termination clause. Either party could end the arrangement at any time. It's prorated payment. The final clause made her pause. Confidentiality. All details of the arrangement, including the financial transaction, must remain permanently sealed. Violation would result in legal action and full repayment of all funds received. Natasha, signed with a pen that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. The courier handed her an envelope containing $25,000 in cashier's checks, nodded once, and departed without a word. She sat on her threadbare couch in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the checks that represented more money than she had seen in years. Within an hour, she had deposited them, paid Timothy's most urgent medical bills, and transferred enough to her landlord to cover 3 months of rent. For the first time since her brother's diagnosis, she could breathe without the crushing weight of financial panic. Friday afternoon, the stylist arrived exactly as Julian had promised. Genevieve was a whirlwind of efficiency, bringing garment bags, shoe boxes, and a makeup case that looked like it belonged in a department store. She circled Natasha with a critical eye that somehow managed to be assessing without being judgmental. Good bone structure, excellent posture despite the waitressing, Genevieve murmured, more to herself than to Natasha. Hair needs professional treatment, but the natural color is lovely. Skin is tired but salvageable. We can work with this. 3 hours later, Natasha barely recognized herself in the mirror. The emerald silk gown hugged her curves in ways that made her simultaneously self-conscious and powerful. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. The makeup was subtle but transformative, emphasizing her green eyes and high cheekbones. "Remember," Genevieve said as she packed up her supplies, "confidence is the most important accessory. You belong in that room just as much as anyone else. Don't let them see you doubt it." Saturday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Natasha stood in her apartment, wearing the emerald gown and diamond earrings that Genevieve had left as loaners. Her heart hammering against her ribs. When the intercom buzzed at precisely 7 o'clock, she took one last deep breath and descended to meet whatever fate awaited her. The driver was a silent professional who held the door of the midnight blue Bentley without comment. Natasha slid into the leather interior, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. They drove through Manhattan as the city lights began to sparkle against the darkening sky. Heading toward the Upper East Side in whatever test Julian Westbrook had designed. The car stopped in front of a building Natasha recognized from magazines. The Ashford Hotel, where a single night in the presidential suite cost more than most people earned in a month. Her stomach tightened with fresh anxiety. This was not a charity gala. This was a hotel. The driver opened her door, and Natasha stepped out on unsteady legs. Before she could process what was happening, Julian appeared in the hotel entrance, devastating in a black tuxedo that made him look like he had stepped from the pages of a magazine. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he took in her transformation. "Tasha," he said, his voice carrying a note she had never heard before. Something that sounded almost like appreciation. "You look extraordinary. Where's the charity gala?" she asked directly, refusing to be distracted by compliments or the way her pulse quickened at his nearness. Julian's expression became unreadable. "There is no gala." "I apologize for the deception, but I needed to ensure you would come. The actual arrangement is different than I initially stated." Natasha took a step backward, her hand already reaching for her phone. "Our contract specifically outlined the terms. You're in breach." "I'm not asking for anything physical," Julian said quickly, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "But I need something more complicated than playing my companion at a public event. I need you to help me understand something I've spent years trying to solve. And I believe you're the only person who can do it. It makes no sense. I'm a waitress. What could I possibly help you understand?" Julian glanced around at the pedestrians passing by, then gestured toward the hotel entrance. "Please, come upstairs. Listen to what I have to say. If you want to leave after hearing my proposal, I'll pay you the full $50,000 and never contact you again. But I'm asking you to give me 30 minutes to explain." Every instinct told Natasha to walk away, to call the entire arrangement off and return to her normal life. But the memory of Timothy's hospital room, the eviction notice, and the crushing weight of bills made her hesitate. And beneath the fear, there was something else. Curiosity about what could drive a man like Julian Westbrook to deception. What mystery could be worth $50,000 to solve? 30 minutes, she agreed. In a public space within the hotel, not a private suite. The lobby bar, Julian agreed immediately, visible to everyone. Whatever makes you comfortable. They settled into a corner booth in the hotel's opulent bar, surrounded by crystal and candlelight. Julian ordered whiskey for himself, and after a questioning glance, champagne for Natasha. When the drinks arrived, he stared into his glass as if searching for words in the amber liquid. 3 years ago, my mother died, he began quietly. She left me a letter with instructions that seemed impossible to follow. She asked me to find someone who could teach me something I'd never learned. How to see beyond the surface. How to recognize value that can't be measured in dollars. How to understand the difference between price and worth. Natasha listened silently, watching emotions flicker across Julian's normally impassive face. I've spent 3 years searching for what she meant. I've donated millions to charities, funded scholarships, even tried therapy. Nothing worked because I was approaching it like a business problem. Then I saw you at the Azure Crown, and something clicked. You carry yourself with dignity despite circumstances that would break most people. You work a job that many would consider beneath them, but you do it with grace. You're struggling, but you're not defeated. I want to understand how you do that. So you lied to me and brought me to a hotel? Natasha's voice was sharp with anger and confusion. I brought you here because my mother's letter contained one more instruction. She left something for me in the presidential suite of this hotel. It's to be opened only in the presence of someone who embodies the qualities she described. The hotel management has held it for 3 years, waiting. I believe you're the person she meant for me to find. The explanation was so unexpected, so genuine in its vulnerability, that Natasha's anger faltered. She studied Julian's face, seeing past the wealth and power to the grief beneath. He was a son still trying to honor his mother's final wishes, still trying to understand a lesson she had wanted him to learn. What exactly are you asking me to do? Natasha asked carefully. Come upstairs with me. Be present when I open whatever my mother left. Help me understand it because I suspect I'll need someone with your perspective to truly grasp her meaning. That's all. No deception, no ulterior motives. Just one grieving son trying to fulfill his mother's last request. Natasha took a long sip of champagne, buying time to think. This was not what she had signed up for, but it was also far less dangerous than what she had feared. And beneath the strangeness of the request, she sensed genuine need. Julian Westbrook, for all his billions, was lost in a way that money could never fix. All right, she said finally, but I'm keeping my phone on, and I'm messaging a friend with your name and location. And if anything happens that makes me uncomfortable, I'm leaving immediately. Agreed, Julian said, relief evident in his eyes. They took the elevator to the top floor in silence. Julian used a key card to access the presidential suite, and Natasha stepped into a space that redefined luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline. Original artwork adorned the walls. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. In the center of the main room sat a single wooden box on a glass table, simple and unadorned among all the opulence. Julian approached it slowly, almost reverently. 3 years I've waited to open this. 3 years of searching for the right person to share this moment. He lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside was a small leather journal and a sealed envelope. Julian opened the envelope first, and Natasha watched his face transform as he read the contents. Tears she suspected he rarely allowed himself to shed began streaming down his cheeks. She knew, he whispered. She knew I would become exactly what I am. Successful, powerful, and completely hollow. She tried to warn me, to teach me, but I was too focused on building my empire to listen. He handed Natasha the letter, and she read words written in an elegant shaking hand. My dearest Julian, if you're reading this, you found someone special. Not because of their wealth or status, but because of their character. The person with you now has something you've lost along your path to success. The ability to find joy in simple things. To value people over profit, to understand that true worth cannot be measured in financial terms. Learn from them. Not as a business transaction, but as a human being seeking to become whole again. The journal contains my own journey from poverty to wealth, my own mistakes and revelations. Read it together. Share your stories. And perhaps you'll finally understand what I spent your whole life trying to teach you. The richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most love. Your mother always... Natasha felt her own eyes filling with tears. This was not the arrangement she had expected. This was something far more intimate and precious. Julian looked at her with raw vulnerability. Will you stay? Will you read this with me? I'll pay you whatever you ask, but honestly, I'm no longer asking as a businessman. I'm asking as someone who desperately needs to understand something essential that he's missing. Natasha thought about her secrets, about the truth she had been hiding. She thought about Timothy and bills and survival. But mostly she thought about the broken man before her, surrounded by every luxury imaginable, but possessing nothing that truly mattered. Stay, she said softly. Not because of the money, because your mother was wise, and her words deserve to be honored. But Julian, there's something you should know about me first. Something that might change your perspective on why you chose me. She reached for the zipper on the back of her gown, and Julian's eyes widened in confusion and concern. But Natasha was not undressing seductively. She was revealing the truth she had hidden beneath expensive silk and borrowed diamonds. As the dress slipped from her shoulders, Julian saw what Natasha had concealed for years. Her back and arms were covered in scars, surgical scars from the car accident that had killed her parents 5 years ago. The accident that had left her with a settlement large enough to pay for college, which she had instead used entirely for Timothy's initial treatments. The accident that had transformed her from a promising law student into a waitress fighting for survival. I'm not who you think I am, Natasha said quietly, pulling the dress back up. I'm not noble or graceful under pressure. I'm just someone who lost everything and is trying to protect the only family I have left. You didn't find me because of some cosmic wisdom. You found me because I'm desperate, and desperate people hide their pain well. Julian stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not disappointment or disgust, but recognition. He slowly unbuttoned his shirt, revealing his own constellation of scars across his chest. Heart surgery, he explained. 2 years ago, I worked myself into a near-fatal heart attack at 33. The doctor said I had to change everything or die. I chose to change nothing except becoming better at hiding the medication and the weakness. We're both pretending, Natasha. Both hiding wounds beneath expensive clothes and carefully constructed facades. They stood in that opulent suite. 2 wounded people who had found each other through deception and desperation, and something profound passed between them. Understanding, recognition. The beginning of something neither had expected. Read the journal with me, Julian said softly. Not as an arrangement, but as 2 people trying to understand how to heal. Whatever happens after tonight, whatever this becomes, let's at least give his mother's wisdom the attention it deserves. Natasha nodded, and they sat together on the luxurious couch, opening a journal that would reveal more than either of them anticipated. The night was just beginning, and already everything had changed. They read through the night, passing the leather journal between them as the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows. Julian's mother, Catherine Westbrook, had been born into poverty in rural Pennsylvania. Her entries detailed a childhood of hunger, a teenage pregnancy that resulted in Julian, and a determined climb from factory worker to successful entrepreneur through sheer force of will and strategic intelligence. But the most powerful entries came from her later years. After she had achieved the wealth she had dreamed of, I have everything now, one passage read, but I find myself mourning the woman I was when I had nothing. That woman knew how to laugh. That woman had friends who loved her for herself, not her bank account. That woman understood that a sunset was valuable not because it was rare, but because it was beautiful. Somewhere between poverty and penthouse, I lost her. I pray Julian does not make the same mistake. Natasha watched Julian's face as he read his mother's words, seeing the grief and recognition warring in his expression. When he finally closed the journal around 3 in the morning, his eyes were red but clearer than she had ever seen them. She was right about everything, he said hoarsely. I built an empire and lost myself completely. I don't even know who I am without the deals, the power plays, the constant acquisition of more. When was the last time I did something purely because it brought me joy? When was the last time I had a real conversation with someone who wasn't trying to get something from me? Tonight, Natasha said softly. Right now. This conversation is real. Julian turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Is it? Or are you still here because of the money? Be honest with me, Natasha. I need at least one person in my life who will tell me the truth. Natasha considered lying, considered protecting herself with the careful wall she had built over years of survival. But something about the vulnerability in Julian's face, the echo of her own loneliness reflected in his eyes, made her choose honesty instead. I came here for the money, she admitted. I stayed because of your mother's letter. I'm remaining now because somewhere in the past few hours, I stopped seeing you as a billionaire and started seeing you as just Julian. A person who was lost and hurting and trying to find his way back to something authentic. I recognize that struggle because I'm fighting the same battle. Tell me about your scars, Julian said quietly, not just the physical ones. Tell me what happened to the law student who became a waitress. So Natasha told him everything. The car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening that killed both her parents instantly. The months of surgeries and physical therapy, the settlement money that could have funded her dreams but instead became Timothy's lifeline when he was diagnosed with leukemia 6 months later, the abandonment by her fiancés, who had loved the promising law student but wanted nothing to do with a scarred woman drowning in medical debt. I had a plan, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Top of my class at Columbia Law, job offers from 3 major firms. A future that looked so bright, I had to squint to see it clearly. And then everything shattered in a moment, and I've spent 5 years just trying to keep my head above water. Some days I'm not sure I remember who I was before everything fell apart. Julian reached out and took her hand, and this time the touch was not transactional or performative. It was human, to people connecting across the chasm of their mutual pain. What if we helped each other remember? He asked, not as a business arrangement, but as 2 people who need to find their way back to who they were supposed to be. I have resources you need. You have perspective I desperately lack. Maybe my mother was wiser than either of us realized. Maybe we found each other for a reason. Natasha wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. Julian, you live in a world I don't belong to. In a week, you'll realize that I'm just a waitress with scars and debt, and this moment of clarity will fade. You'll go back to your empire, and I'll go back to the azure crown, and this will just be a strange night we both eventually forget. Then let's make it more than one night, Julian said with sudden intensity. Come work for me. Not as an assistant or a subordinate, but as something I've never had before. A truth teller. Someone whose job is to challenge me, to question my decisions, to remind me when I'm losing sight of what matters. I'll pay you enough to cover your brother's treatments and your expenses. In exchange, you help me become the person my mother believed I could be. That's insane, Natasha protested. You barely know me. I have no experience in your world. I would be useless to you. You're wrong. You have exactly the experience I need. You understand struggle. You know what it means to sacrifice for someone you love. You have maintained your integrity despite circumstances that would justify abandoning it. Those qualities are rarer than business degrees or corporate experience. Say yes, Natasha. Take a chance on something unconventional. Before Natasha could respond, Julian's phone erupted with a series of urgent notifications. His expression darkened as he read the messages. And the vulnerable man who had shared his grief disappeared behind the mask of the ruthless businessman. I have to go, he said abruptly, standing and buttoning his shirt. There's a situation with one of my properties. A hostile takeover attempt that could destroy everything I've built. Then go, Natasha said, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course, the moment had been too fragile to last. Reality was reasserting itself, pulling them back to their separate worlds. Julian paused at the door, then turned back with fierce determination in his eyes. Come with me. You wanted to see my world? You're about to get a comprehensive introduction, and maybe along the way. You can tell me if I'm making decisions for the right reasons, or just protecting my empire out of ego? Against every logical instinct, Natasha found herself nodding. She slipped her shoes back on and followed Julian out of the suite, into the elevator, and down to where his car waited. The driver navigated through the pre-dawn Manhattan streets toward the Westbrook Global Properties headquarters in Midtown. The building was ablaze with lights despite the early hour. Julian strode through the lobby with Natasha struggling to keep pace in her evening gown and heels. Employees stared as they passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to shock at seeing their notoriously private CEO with an unknown woman in formal attire at 4 a.m. The executive floor was chaos. A dozen people clustered around a conference table covered in documents and laptop computers. A woman in an expensive suit looked up as Julian entered, relief flooding her features. Thank God. Thornton Holdings made their move an hour ago. They've been quietly buying up shares through shell corporations for months. They're at 42% ownership and climbing. If they hit 51%, they can force a board vote and remove you as CEO. Julian's jaw tightened. Richard Thornton. I should have seen this coming. He's been waiting years for an opportunity to destroy me. Who is Richard Thornton? Natasha whispered. My former business partner, Julian, replied grimly. We started our first company together 15 years ago. When it became successful, he wanted to cut corners, to prioritize profit over ethics. I refused and bought him out. He's hated me ever since and built his own empire specifically to compete with mine. This is his revenge. For the next 2 hours, Natasha watched Julian transform into the corporate warrior that had built his empire. He analyzed data with frightening speed, made calls to lawyers and financial advisors, and strategized countermoves with ruthless efficiency. This was the Julian Westbrook the world knew. Brilliant, merciless, unstoppable. But Natasha also noticed the things others missed. The way his hand trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. The pallor beneath his tan. The subtle grimace when he reached for his chest. Right where the surgical scars marked his heart surgery. Around 6 a.m. during a brief lull in the crisis. Natasha pulled Julian aside into his private office. You need to stop, she said firmly. Your heart cannot handle this level of stress. You're going to trigger another cardiac event. I don't have a choice, Julian snapped. If I lose this company, thousands of people lose their jobs. My investors lose billions. Everything I've built collapses. And if you die, Natasha challenged. What happens then? All those people still lose their jobs, but you're not around to see it. Your mother left you that journal to teach you something, Julian. Maybe this is the test. Maybe the question is not whether you can save your empire, but whether you're willing to destroy yourself to keep it. Julian stared at her, and she watched the internal war play out across his face. Pride versus survival. Legacy versus life. What would you do? He asked finally. Natasha thought about Timothy, about the years she had sacrificed everything to keep him alive. I would ask myself what I'm really fighting for. Is it the company itself, or is it ego? If Thornton takes over, will the company actually fail, or will it just have different leadership? And most importantly, is winning this battle worth losing the war for your own humanity? Before Julian could respond, his assistant burst into the office. We have a problem. Thornton is offering your shareholders double the current stock price. People are selling. We're at 48% and climbing. The room erupted into fresh chaos. Advisors argued about legal options, financial strategies, media responses. Julian stood in the center of it all, and Natasha saw him fracturing under the pressure. His hand went to his chest again, and this time the grimace was pronounced. Everyone out, Julian said suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. I need the room cleared. Now. His employees filed out reluctantly, leaving only Natasha and Julian in the expansive office as dawn broke over Manhattan. I've been thinking about my mother's journal, Julian said quietly, about what she wrote regarding value and worth. I built this company believing it defined me, that without it, I would be nothing. But maybe the real test is whether I have the courage to let it go, to choose life over legacy. What are you saying? Natasha asked. Julian pulled out his phone and made a call. "Richard, it's Julian. I'm accepting your offer. You want the company? It's yours. I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. Draw up the paperwork." He ended the call before Thornton could respond, and in the silence that followed, Natasha saw something remarkable. The tension drained from Julian's shoulders. Color returned to his face. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely at peace. "I just gave away a multi-billion-dollar empire," he said wonderingly, "and I feel lighter than I have in years." "You chose yourself," Natasha said softly. "You chose life. Your mother would be proud." Julian crossed to the windows, looking out over the city he had conquered. "I still have personal investments worth hundreds of millions. I'll be fine financially. Better than fine? But more importantly, I'll be alive. I'll have time to figure out who Julian Westbrook is when he's not defined by corporate conquest." He turned to Natasha with an expression of hope and fear mingled together. "That offer I made earlier still stands. Help me figure out who I'm supposed to be. Not for money, although I'll still pay you enough to care for your brother, but because I think we're supposed to help each other heal. Two broken people finding their way back to wholeness together." Natasha thought about all the reasons she should say no. The vast differences in their backgrounds, the complications that would inevitably arise, the risk of trusting someone from a world that had only ever hurt her. But she also thought about Catherine Westbrook's journal, about the wisdom of a woman who understood that the most valuable things in life could not be purchased. And she thought about the man before her, who had just sacrificed everything he thought defined him for a chance at authentic life. "Yes," she said finally, "but on one condition. We do this as equals. Not as Billionaire and Waitress, but as two people trying to remember who they were supposed to be. No power imbalance. No pedestals. Just honesty and mutual support." Julian crossed to her and took both her hands in his. "Equals," he agreed. "And maybe, if we're very lucky, eventually something more." 6 months later, Natasha stood in the waiting room of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Her hands clasped tightly together. Julian sat beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her anxiety. Timothy had undergone a bone marrow transplant 2 weeks earlier. His last hope for survival after conventional treatments had failed. The doors opened, and Dr. Morrison appeared, her expression carefully neutral. Natasha's heart plummeted. She knew that look. She had seen it before when doctors delivered bad news. "Brooks," Dr. Morrison said, then smiled. Actually smiled. "The transplant was successful. Timothy is in remission. It's early still, and we'll need to monitor him closely. But the cancer is gone." Natasha's legs gave out. Julian caught her, holding her as sobs of relief and joy racked her body. 6 months of working alongside him, of learning to trust, of slowly building something real and precious, had led to this moment. Timothy would live. "Thank you," she gasped when she could speak again. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me," Julian said gently. "Thank yourself for being strong enough to survive until help arrived. Thank your brother for fighting. I just provided resources. You provided the love that made those resources matter." They visited Timothy together, finding him weak but smiling in his hospital bed. At 17, he had endured more than most people faced in a lifetime. But he had survived, and now he had a future to dream about again. "So," Timothy said, his voice hoarse but teasing, "are you two finally going to admit you're in love? Or do I have to play the dying brother card to force a confession?" "You're not dying," Natasha said firmly, but she felt Julian's hand tighten on hers. "She's right," Julian added. "Although regarding the other matter, your sister is stubborn about maintaining professional boundaries." "There's nothing professional about the way you look at her," Timothy observed. "I may be sick, but I'm not blind." Natasha felt heat rising in her cheeks. The truth was that over the past 6 months, her relationship with Julian had evolved into something far more complex than their initial arrangement. He had kept his promise to step back from corporate warfare, selling Westbrook Global Properties and focusing instead on meaningful philanthropy. Together, they had started a foundation supporting families dealing with catastrophic medical expenses. turning their shared trauma into purpose. And somewhere along the way, professional respect had deepened into friendship, and friendship had bloomed into something neither of them had expected. Love. Real, complicated. Occasionally frustrating love between two people learning to be whole again. Fine, Natasha said, looking directly at Julian. I love you. I've loved you since the night you chose life over empire. I've loved you through every therapy session, every panic attack, every moment of doubt. And I'm terrified because I don't know how to be in love without losing myself again. Julian cupped her face gently in his hands. Then we'll learn together. We'll make mistakes and forgive each other. We'll maintain our independence while building something shared. We'll do it all imperfectly and honestly, just like we've done everything else. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, full of promise and hope. Timothy applauded weakly from his hospital bed, and even Dr. Morrison smiled before discreetly leaving the room. I need to tell you something, Julian said, when they finally broke apart. I've been meeting with lawyers about establishing a trust for Timothy's ongoing care. Whatever happens between us, romantically or otherwise, his treatments will always be fully funded. Your brother's health will never again depend on your ability to work yourself to exhaustion. Fresh tears spilled down Natasha's cheeks. Julian, that's too much. It's not nearly enough. But it's a start. Your mother's journal taught me that real wealth is not about accumulation, but about meaningful contribution. Timothy's recovery, your peace of mind. These are investments that actually matter. 1 year after that night in the Ashford Hotel, Natasha stood in a Columbia Law School classroom. Returning to finish the degree she had abandoned 5 years earlier, Julian had insisted on funding her education, and after months of argument, she had finally accepted. Not as charity, but as the kind of support people who loved each other provided. She still worked with the foundation. Now, as its executive director, combining her legal knowledge with her personal experience to help families navigate the nightmare of medical debt. Julian worked beside her, having discovered that using his business acumen to solve real problems was far more satisfying than acquiring more wealth. Timothy, now 18 and in remission for over a year, had started college with dreams of becoming a doctor himself. The cancer had left scars, both physical and emotional, but it had also given him a profound appreciation for life's fragility and preciousness. On a Saturday evening in early spring, Julian took Natasha back to the Ashford Hotel. They rode the elevator to the presidential suite, and Natasha felt a wave of nostalgia for the two broken people who had met there seeking solutions to problems they barely understood. Do you remember what you said that night? Julian asked as they stood by the windows overlooking the city. You said I would realize you were just a waitress with scars and debt, and this moment would fade. I was wrong about so many things, Natasha admitted. You were right too, about the things that mattered. You saw through my wealth to the hollowness beneath. You challenged me to choose life over ego. You taught me that real strength is not about never falling, but about getting back up with grace. Julian knelt then, pulling a small box from his pocket. Natasha Brooks, you are not just a waitress with scars. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known. You are my truth teller, my conscience, my partner in every way that matters. Will you marry me? Natasha looked at the ring, a simple emerald surrounded by diamonds, the exact green of the dress she had worn that first night. She thought about Catherine Westbrook's journal, about the wisdom of a woman who understood that true wealth was measured in love, not money. Yes, she said, her voice strong and certain, but only if you promise we'll keep each other honest. That we'll never let wealth or comfort make us forget where we came from, or the people we fought to become. I promise, Julian said, slipping the ring onto her finger. We'll build a life based on the values my mother tried to teach me. Purpose over profit. Love over luxury. Character over conquest. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by Timothy, a handful of close friends, and the memory of Catherine Westbrook, whose final lesson had saved her son's life and brought two wounded souls together. The Azure Crown restaurant closed a year later. Not because of financial failure, but because Natasha and Julian bought the building and converted it into a resource center for families dealing with medical crises. On the wall, they hung a plaque with Catherine's words: "The richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most love." Natasha never forgot what it felt like to be desperate, to measure her worth in dollar amounts, to hide scars beneath borrowed elegance. That memory kept her grounded, kept her fighting for others who stood where she had once stood, and Julian never forgot. The night he gave away an empire and gained a life, every decision, every choice, every moment was filtered through the question his mother had challenged him to answer: are you building something that matters, or just accumulating more? Together, they proved that redemption was possible, that love could grow from desperation and deception, that two people who had lost themselves could find their way back by helping each other heal. The millionaire had indeed paid a fortune for one night with a waitress, but what he discovered when she revealed her scars was worth far more than money could ever measure. He discovered his humanity. She discovered her strength. And together, they discovered that the greatest wealth was not in what they owned, but in who they chose to become. Years later, when people asked Natasha about her unconventional love story, she would smile and say simply, "He hired me to teach him about value. Instead, we taught each other about worth, and that made all the difference."